Right, I see everybody joining in. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from across Canada. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us today. I am Jigar Kanjani with Supply Chain Canada West, and I'll be your host for today's session. Today's topic hits close to most of us that are joining us today. I'm sure a lot of you who are practicing supply chain as a profession, you would have done the work, you would have cut costs, improved lead times, reduced risks, and hit every target on board. And then you ask for budget, for headcount, for seat at the table, and the answer comes back not right now. If that sounds familiar, you are exactly in the right place. Before we dive in, let me play a short video that showcases how Supply Chain Canada is the community that we have built together. And one of the highlights of our community is the conference that we do every year, which this year is going to be in Edmonton in October, which we are super excited about. So this video would just talk about the same. Let's watch the video. Let me quickly plug it here. Oops. Awesome. Thank you so much for watching that video, guys. And that really talks about what the conference is all about. You saw a few clips from what the conference looked like last year, and that was the national conference where we had people joining in from across Canada. Now, this one is the West Conference, where you'll see people joining from British Columbia, Alberta, and even the rest of Canada as well, right? So it's going to be a great opportunity for folks to network, connect, learn, and really touch base on the folks that you haven't seen in a while. So it's one of those events that you wouldn't want to miss. Please do check our events page and sign up as soon as you can. Um, and now back to what we are here today about. So here is why the conversation about selling supply chain value is so important. The research tells us that CEOs spend about 1% of their time thinking about procurement and supply chain. That's 1% for a function that controls over half the organization's budget. That's not a resource problem or a capacity problem. It's a visibility and positioning problem. And that's exactly what we are going to dig into today. How to change that conversation and how to get that buy in. Before we begin today's session, this session is being recorded, and recording along with the slide decks will be emailed to all the registered participants after the webinar. So don't worry about capturing every detail down. And also, in terms of the CPD points, this session qualifies for 2 CPD points. For SCMP members in Alberta, these will be added to your profile automatically. For members in other provinces, you'll need to log them manually. Please note that more than 50% attendance is required to qualify for the CPD credits, and we'll be tracking those through the Zoom platform here. All the attendees here are in listen only mode for the presentation. For questions, please use the Q&A button present at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll get through all the question and answers as we have a dedicated Q&A segment at the end of the session. Start sending in those questions anytime you want during the session, and we will encourage and try to cover all those as soon as we can. Siobhan may also be running a few polls during her presentation, so feel free to interact with those as it comes out. So keep an eye out for that as well. Now, before taking any more time, I would like to introduce our presenter for today's session, Siobhan Chinnery, a senior supply chain executive with more than 30 years of experience leading transformations across some of Canada's largest and most complex organizations. Siobhan's career spans the forest industry, oil and gas, logistics, and professional consulting. She has held VP level roles at Finning, the world's largest caterpillar dealer, and has worked with a lot of consulting firms across Canada and a lot of multinational companies too. She also is a graduate of Harvard Business School's Executive Leadership Program and holds an MBA from European University in Brussels. In 2019, she was recognized by Supply Chain Canada as one of the 100 most influential women in Canadian supply chain. But here is what makes Siobhan truly special and perfect for today's session. She hasn't just studied this problem, she has lived it. Throughout her career, she has repeatedly repositioned supply chain from cost center to strategic enabler, securing investments, unlocking resources, and building the foundation that is needed for executive trust. And most professionals would usually struggle with building that. So that's what she has done, and that's why she would be the best person for today's conversation. And with that, Siobhan, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. You can hear me fine?
Yes.
Welcome. I want to start by congratulating you for taking the time out from your busy schedule to focus on your development and taking this lunch hour today to do focus on that. So thanks for joining us. Uh, Oops, I went too fast. There we go. So, as Jigar said in the introduction, you've working hard, you've done the work, and you have a really good business case. You know that what you're proposing to the organization is good for the business, and for some reason, it still isn't landing with a yes for you. And so that probably stings just to be reminded that this is, something that we face often as supply chain functions in organizations. And you certainly probably don't need me reminding you of that, but that's probably why you're here today. So what I want to start with is I've asked Jigar to put a question in the chat, and I want to get some interaction, understand who you are, why you're here today. So the question that he's going to post in the chat, and I'd love for you to respond there, is if you could change one thing about how your internal stakeholders perceive the value of the supply chain team, what would it be? So again, if you could change one thing about how your internal stakeholders perceive the value of the supply chain team, what would it be? And if you could just start throwing your answers in there, that would be very helpful for me. And it just helps me understand why you're here today and making sure that we, address the needs of the group that we're meeting with. So, what I'm going to talk about today is really three main things. I want to talk about first and foremost the gaps. Like what are we missing before we even begin speaking? And so we'll address the gaps. And then secondly, what's the playbook and what do elite influencers do differently? And we'll get into who those elite influencers are and what are they doing differently. And then third, a framework that you can use. You can start using it this afternoon, perhaps. And so those are the three things we're going to accomplish today. And appreciate getting your input. You can keep, answering that question for me as I carry on. What, I think is a good example of how I see this playing out, not constantly, frequently. I do coach quite a few leaders, and maybe not strangely, I do coach supply chain leaders. And some of them are in senior roles, and some of them are in their first VP roles. And this is honestly one of the topics that we talk about the most, that I coach the most on, is how do you influence and really get your message across effectively. And one area, and I think this is something people will be familiar with, is I think this is a good example of what isn't working, is I often hear supply chain leaders saying they need the procurement system to capture category data. And so they are seeking dollars spent maybe with a new system or maybe with a consulting firm to expand the system they already have to have category data so that then, frankly, we can do a better job of sourcing and strategic sourcing, category management, all that type of stuff. And this is a good example of where I find people falling down is they're speaking in their terms, their languages about this data they need for category management, and it's probably not landing well with your internal customer because of the framing. So let's get into it. I think just to be really straightforward and plain and simple, I want to just use an example of two different kinds of approaches that people use. And I want to think about a financial advisor, perhaps. Maybe it's your financial advisor that you've been working with for a long time. So let's think about two different approaches that financial advisor might take. So they give you a call up and they say, hello, I've got this great new product. It's and a really great strong fund manager. They've been providing returns of 12% over 5 years, and there's a very low MER. I think you should move your RSP to this fund. So that's one approach. How does that feel when someone just calls you up and sells you on this product like that? A second approach might be more along the lines of, hey, we haven't talked in a while, and you've been investing for quite some time, and you've probably watched your investments go up and down, and maybe you even took a bit of a hit in 2016 when oil prices went down to $26. But maybe even today, with the markets the way they are and up and down and oil prices surging, those might be good or bad for you. And then, maybe you know someone recently who's been laid off or your spouse was laid off and you really have a different feeling about risk. So what I really want to understand today is, where are you at today? How are you feeling with the way the markets are? What's changed in your personal life that maybe you're needing to look after in the next 10 years, and what might be changing about your investment strategy? And I really wanted to get a good understanding about that before I talk to you about some new products we have. So you can see there, I hope, that there's a very different approach. It's the same product. I have a new RSP or a new investment, a fund manager, whatever it is I'm selling, but it's a completely different conversation. The first approach, the first advisor is really talking about what they have. They have a new product that they're talking to you about, a new fund or whatever that happens to be. And the second is the approach is really understanding you as the customer. What are your needs? What are your priorities? What are you worried about? Um, and really, the only difference is the same product is going to be presented, but the difference is that they took the time, the second approach took the time to understand your needs. And so I wonder, when was the last time you walked into an opportunity to present an approach or ask for budget or seeking additional resources when you approached it in that way, the second form, in seeking to understand before presenting your, say, product or your solution? So really what this story is telling us is there's really two different approaches. And one I'd call the broadcaster. The broadcaster is leading with the features and the data that they have. They're probably speaking in supply chain language like, you know, inventory turns or category management data or something like that. They make the case, this is why I need this, and then they wait. Now they have the right facts, they're great facts, but they probably have lost on framing it. And the second approach I'd call the translator approach, where you lead with the stakeholders' priorities. You're talking about their needs and you're speaking in their language, not in supply chain language, but what language is important to them and the actually the words that they use. And we build the case around their win. What does their win look like? What does success look like for them? It's still the same facts. We're right on the facts, but we're winning differently now because of how we've framed it. So it's the same facts, it's the same role, same person, same team, but perhaps completely different outcomes. And it really is all about framing. So, what I'd like to understand is, where we're all starting from. And so we're going to have a bit of an interactive poll now. We're going to go through three questions, and Jigger is going to put those up for us. And so the first question is really to understand your level of confidence. So, before I tell you anything more, I really want to understand where you're starting from. Only answer honestly. Nobody else can see what your answer is. So just be very honest and answer this question. So, how well do you really understand what's the most important to your most important internal stakeholder and what they need from supply chain this year? And this isn't something, you maybe heard them say in a meeting or to someone else, or maybe it's not, it's not something that's posted on the walls as the strategy for this year. But what do they really need? What's the thing that keeps them up at night? The thing they're being judged on. Okay. So we feel like a few of us have a very good idea. And a lot of us think we have a pretty good idea, a solid general sense of where they are. And then look, we have some that are maybe know the basics, but not the specifics. So, pretty good. We feel like we have a pretty good general understanding of our customer, our internal customer. So that's pretty good. So let's move to the second question, which is more getting a little bit more specific. So right now, right today, again, we're thinking of our most important internal stakeholder. And tick off all of the ones that apply that you know and understand about your most important internal stakeholder. What's their single biggest priority for this year? And that's the professional priority. So that could be from a personal perspective or from their business team perspective. The metric that they are personally measured and rewarded on. The decision that they are most anxious about in the next 90 days. The last time supply chain made their life significantly easier. And when was the last time supply chain made their life significantly more difficult? Now, be honest. and pick all that apply. And thinking about it as today, not if I go back to last year after I had a really good conversation with somebody, but right now, right today, see how you can do on those questions. I would say most people I've interacted with can answer a couple of them pretty well, but there are some ones that get skipped. And those are often the most uncomfortable questions to ask. So we do feel like we understand their biggest professional priorities and that what they're personally measured on, that they're most anxious about in the next 90 days is, less than half of us. And then the really challenging question, I would say, which is quite, I think, telling, and this is the one that's uncomfortable to ask, was when was the last time supply chain made their life significantly harder? So, really interesting results when we think about these questions and how easy they are to understand and obtain. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And our next polling question is really about the language we use when we're communicating. So think about the last time you made a case for increased budget or additional resources. And what would describe how you best framed it for your internal stakeholders? In terms of the supply chain needed to operate effectively, in terms of what the business would gain or protect. Honestly, I'm not sure. I just presented the data, made the case, or I don't think I framed it strategically at all. No judgment. Let's just answer again honestly. This is really just diagnostic. It's not meant to be evaluating anybody. It just helps me understand where we're at. Okay. So nobody thinks that they didn't frame it strategically at all, which is great to see. Some are honestly not sure. We presented the data and made the case. And in terms of what supply chain needed is often what I see. And then we have few people who feel that they're putting it in the terms of the business would understand and what they would gain or protect. So that's pretty good. We're starting from a good place, I think, a lot of us, and some of us are really not sure. And so hopefully you'll find this next part of our presentation helpful in getting more confidence in all of those questions, I would say. Okay. My mouse, come on. There. Oop. Do you need to turn off the poll or something? Because I'm not advancing the slide for some reason, Jigar.
Let me check on that for you.
Uh-oh, technical difficulties.
Uh, seems like the slide is stuck. Oh no, just a moment.
Okay, so this is when I get out the old soft shoe and start dancing. Keep everybody entertained for a little bit. So what did
It,
those polls really tell us? So we have a variety, of course, as you would expect. Some people are feeling much more confident in how they've approached it, but there's maybe something is still not quite working. And so let's talk about the gaps and what we do to get closing. And so this is what I mentioned at the beginning. I'm going to talk about those gaps. And so what I'm using as an example here is may seem interesting, but really, who are the most successful influencers out there? And I always think of salespeople, effective salespeople. And so, what do effective salespeople do differently than maybe less effective salespeople? And what they do is they understand their customers' needs, they align their offering, their product, their whatever it is they're selling to meet those customers' needs, and then they communicate the value very clearly. So let's start with understanding the customer needs. And this is really a true deep understanding of the customer's needs, really going beyond understanding what their stated desire is, but to identify their core motivations and what they need. And I think a lot of you in this call as supply chain professionals are probably quite familiar with interest-based negotiating. And this is really kind of a twist on that. You know, if we think about interest-based negotiating, the number one thing we want to do is get to the interests of the parties in the negotiation. We don't want to be stuck on the positions. So, what is their interest behind the position that they're presenting? This is the same with our internal customers, even external customers, but internal customers. They may have a position or they might say the thing that they're presenting, which you really understand well. But what is really behind that need that they're communicating to you? And do we really fully understand the interest behind that customer's needs? And do we really even understand who that customer is? I have had some clients I work with who have a hard time even defining for me who their customer is. You know, we really need to understand and identify who is that internal customer. And when I think about our internal customer, I think about who is it that I need to get a yes from. So this could be lots of different people in the organization. It could be people in the organization who just look at supply chain as a cost center. There could be people in the organization who look at a supply chain as a threat, that you're trying to do their job for them. That they know how to buy things, they buy their car, they buy their house, they certainly know how to do this stuff, and they don't really need your help and they feel threatened by you. And so, who are those people that we need to say yes in order for our function to be as successful and as effective for the business as it can be? That's who your customer is. And sometimes your customer, depending on your business, like when I was at Finning, our customer really was the external customer as well. But between me and my team and the external customer is a whole lot of internal customers within the business that I need to work with to effectively meet the external customers' needs. And so sometimes in supply chain, we focus too much on our functions needs, our inefficiencies, and we see our inefficiencies as how they're affecting the organization. I see supply chain leaders talking about the number of POs issued or the number of POs issued after the fact. You know, we're talking about leakage or maybe the tail spend or the categories, as I mentioned at the top. We're focused on what we see as professionals. We come in, especially if we're in a new role, we're new in a new organization that needs our expertise. We see all the problems that are not the way they should be from a supply chain perspective. And it's exciting because it's like, wow, I can fix that. I can fix that. I can fix that. Those are all the things that aren't the way they should be from a supply chain perspective. And we get excited about that, but we have to be able to translate that into the value and the needs of our internal customers in order for us to be successful. And I found that, frankly, that was how I was most successful in all the roles I had over the years, was really understanding my internal customers, which in my case was usually operations, understanding their needs, developing a really strong rapport and relationship with those internal customers, and always speaking in their language. And so that takes me into the next one, which is aligning your offering with their needs. And this is really about the translating, the things you've learned about your internal customer, translating what they're working on, they're worried about, they're focused on, into what your product or service is that best meets their needs. And less talking about supply chain, honestly, and more talking about their expectations, ensuring their relevance and that type of thing, and framing it that way. And really, when you think about it this way, the translation part from what is a great supply chain, an effective supply chain, and all of our tools that we have in our toolbox, the translation is your job as well, is translating that supply chain offering into their benefits, into their framework, not your framework, into their KPIs, not your KPIs, and into their lingo. So when you're talking with those internal customers, actually using the words they use, even if it's the wrong word, maybe they're using a word that's incorrect from a supply chain perspective, but it's their word and they use it all the time. Use their words and not your lingo. And that's a really great way to translate that work so it lands with them in their offering or your offering to them, pardon me, and meeting their needs. And so that's step one, understanding who your customer is, what their needs are, not their positions, but their actual needs behind the position. And then how do I align my benefits, my product that I'm offering to meet those customer needs? And then third, I think this is probably one of the areas that most people get hung up on too, is communicating that value effectively and communicating in a way that resonates with that internal customer and highlighting the benefits, the real benefits to them, which is again behind their positions, but what they really need, and in a way that it builds loyalty and trust. And so, there's lots of ways you can see this is true in so many things in relationships, all sorts of things. You can spend years and years building trust, and you can make one misstep and erode that trust forever. And one way I've seen that trust really get damaged and hurt is the way we communicate supply chain value creation and really muddying the waters with things like cost avoidance. And I used to have colleagues that would kid around with me and call it supply chain math. And I even wrote an article about it years ago, probably 10 years ago now, on LinkedIn, which is, the problems with supply chain math. And so really having good communications and that land well with that internal customer so that you're building the trust and moving the value in their language. And so, the really important thing to understand about these three gaps, these three steps, is that if you could be a wonderful communicator, but if you haven't got those first two done, then you're just communicating bad information really effectively. So most important is step one and step two, and then of course the cherry on top is being able to communicate it well. So the message today really is, I'm sorry, I hate to tell you this if you didn't realize it, but you're already in sales. And the problem is that in supply chain, we really don't get sales training. We meet with a lot of salespeople. We know them. We see them every day. And honestly, I always felt like I was in sales in my job when people would ask me. I always said that in my role in supply chain, I was really like an internal consultant. And the one thing I certainly learned working in professional consulting firms is that a big part of the job is selling. Selling your services, selling your solutions, selling your solutions to their problem. And that was always the most effective. Going out with a slide deck telling them all the things our consulting firm did was certainly never going to get anywhere, but really spending time understanding the potential customer and addressing what their needs were was really the goal and the key to success. And so thinking about those sales folks, you know them, you meet them, you have those suppliers that you work with, and you know the ones you don't like, you know the ones that we might consider like I don't know, slimy for lack of a more polite term, I guess. Or used car salesman approach is another line that people have used. But it really talks about pushy sales. And pushy sales are when it's not landing right. It doesn't feel good. It's not meeting your needs or what you need to solve your problem or whatever it is you're seeking a solution to. And the suppliers that you like working with, the ones that you really trust, they really are the ones that have taken the time to get to know your business, get to know and understand your needs, what you're facing, what your goals are, what your priorities are. And you know what? Those suppliers, they're the ones who are highly trained. They're highly trained suppliers and salespeople, and that's who we meet and work with every day. Yet we don't get that same training in supply chain. So, what do we know about highly effective salespeople, and what is it that they know? The first thing is they always know the customer better than the customer knows themselves. They've done the research, they know the pressures, they understand what a win looks like for that individual person, for the business's quarter or year end. And they show up every single time with that knowledge. So if you think about that and you're a leader leading a team of supply chain people, does everyone on your team have that knowledge? Does everybody on your team show up to every conversation with your internal customer with that understanding of what's really the most important thing to your internal customer? Because as a leader, you could understand and be going in and, say pitching a solution. But if that trust and stuff has been eroded because people on your team aren't starting from that position of understanding, then, it can reflect poorly on the whole supply chain and erode trust for the whole supply chain team. And so, really understanding what your customer needs and knowing it better, really, than they know themselves. And especially if you think about it from a supply chain perspective, you should know what they need from a supply chain perspective better than they know. And so, then we also taking the time to educate them in how we communicate to them. And so that's what highly effective salespeople know, is they do know their customers better than their customers know themselves. Oops, wrong button. The second thing highly effective salespeople know is they know how to translate their product into their customers' language and priorities. So they don't ditch or get rid of or forget about the features or the benefits of their product, but what they do is they use words that are used by the customer and they translate them into their language. So we would take supply chain metrics and we would change that into perhaps revenue growth or customer experience metrics, maybe the reduction in the cost to serve. Sometimes really large clients can be very expensive clients as well because they're so big, we kind of give them everything. And so, ways that we can help our sales team or whoever who's responsible for the cost of that customer, if we can translate that into making that customer a less expensive customer to serve, that's a great way to speak in their language. Risk reduction, this is one I see people use a lot. They talk about reduction of risk, but I think we have to be careful not to be too uh, airy-fairy and, very speculative visionary about risk. I think we need to be very specific about risk. And when we talk about risk, we need to address a risk that they have identified, like that they know and understand to be a risk, and put our product, services, whatnot into a risk they already perceive. And sometimes we need to take some time and drip and drip and drip information on them so that that risk actually came from us, but now they own it and believe it and think it's their idea because we've been dripping the idea on them for a while. And so none of these things are quick overnights, right? This is really a lot of work over time, dripping ideas and understanding your internal customer over time. but then really using all of that information we've gained to translate into their language, their priorities. And then thirdly, the very effective supply salesperson can build trust that will survive a bad quarter or a bad, incident in the relationship. And you know that as supply chain professionals, when you have suppliers that, I don't know, make a mistake or something, you're willing to work with them because you have a trust with that person, with that company. And it's the same in the supply chain world. We should be able to build enough trust with our internal customers that we can overcome setbacks or mistakes made. And one thing I've seen over my years is I go into organizations in a new role, and they're struggling with a contractor, a supplier that was made, a decision that was made. And in hindsight, it was a bad decision. Like they should have abandoned it. We went to RFP, we selected supplier A, and then supplier A isn't meeting the mark. They aren't doing it. And I've seen so many supply chain people die on that hill and they protect that supplier and try and make it work and they lose trust. They erode trust with the business doing that. When maybe the best thing they could have done is just get that supplier out of there, admit we made a mistake and do something different. That's not always easy, but it does build trust with our internal customers when we can admit mistakes and move forward. And so, really, that trust and building trust that can outlast a bad contract, a poor supplier performance, that's what the highly effective salesperson can do. And that's what we can do too in supply chain. So, we've had just a short time today to talk about this and what the difference is. And, really the gap between understanding something and actually changing how you operate day to day in those real conversations with real colleagues under real pressure of what's going on at work. That gap from today to those conversations can be quite significant. And that's why we're offering a 2-day workshop that Jigar will tell us more about in a few minutes. But it is a workshop focused on this subject entirely. It's a 2-day workshop online, and it will be a working session. It's not going to be a lecture like today. It's an actual working session with breakout rooms and you doing a lot of work and it's based on a lot of what I'm talking about today, but going much deeper into knowing your customer. So day one, we're going to spend the whole time really knowing your customer, really getting behind those positions and understanding the interests and the needs of your internal customers and identifying your internal customers, making sure we're focused on the right colleagues and or people in the organization. Sometimes we miss the most important person in the organization because we're not thinking about them as an internal customer, and they could be influencing other people. They're often saying consulting, like if you're in a room with someone negotiating, who's the person who's not in the room? Who's the person who's actually influencing the outcome of this meeting who isn't in the room today? And that's an important role, person, colleague to understand when you're trying to make progress with your supply chain value proposition. And then the second day of the workshop, we're really going to talk about how we make the sale. And that's really about influence. How do we influence? How do we communicate? How do we show up, take the stage, and really speak in the language of leadership? I think a lot of the coaching I do too is that whole idea of what got me here isn't going to get me there. And it's really how do I speak in the language of the executives and in an influential way so that I can make the sale and really communicate and be much more effective in landing that supply chain value proposition. And finally, at the end of the 2 days, you will have your own playbook to take back to work with you, to get to work right away and ready to use immediately following the workshop. And so those really are the outcomes of the 2 day workshop where you'll have this blueprint you'll take back to work to help you get those resources and influence internally. And Jigger, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shawan. I'm sure folks have gained great insights from this topic. And it is one of the lesser talked about topics. Like we at Supply Chain Canada, I don't remember we talking about this critical topic that's so important to all the supply chain professionals. We all remember the time when supply chain didn't get any seat at the table, right? And now it's still at a point where we don't get a majority seat at the table, which it should, because it's so critical to any business and it's a competitive advantage as a function in a business, right? So great points touched there, Shawan. I would still encourage everyone to keep sending in those questions. We have received a few of those, but please use the question and answer button that you'll be able to see at the bottom of the Zoom window. Use that button, fill in your question, and we will be able to answer as many questions as possible today. As you rightly touched, we have a workshop upcoming in 2 weeks' time, the buy-in blueprint. You'll be able to scan this QR code here to get to the workshop page where you'll be able to see specific details of the workshop, and you'll be able to register from then and there if you are available on those dates. And with that, we will now transition on to our Q&A segment where we will open the floor to the folks who have joined here today with us to for providing them an opportunity to share their feedback, ask questions if they have any. And while they do that, I would like to ask a few questions to you, Shawan. I'm sure a lot of those folks that have joined here today with us would also be able to resonate with the questions that I have. Starting off with the first one. So, Shawan, you opened up with broadcaster versus translator, some facts there. Same role, completely different outcome. That was a great insight too. I think a lot of people watching just recognize themselves as broadcasters. I'm sure I felt the same too. And can you walk us through the real world example? Say someone has a procurement savings when they reduce spend by $2 million on a key category. What does the broadcaster version of that pitch sound like when they walk into a leadership meeting? And what does the translator version sound like? Like same data but different framing. How does that connect?
Yeah. So if I think about different examples, like, often let's say a common one is we need to consolidate our spend, we need to um, you know, reduce the number of suppliers we have, so we need to get more strategic in our procurement. So we're going to do some strategic sourcing, go to RFP, and then select the supplier. And this will reduce the tail spend, will reduce the number of suppliers we have, and then we won't have to manage as many vendors in the accounts payable system. And we'll get better value by consolidating, and we'll be able to get a lower price because we're going to use less suppliers. And all of that sounds like we're talking in the language that they would understand, right? Oh, yeah, that'd be better, but a lower price, right? But what is your internal customer hearing? They're hearing that you're going to mess with their suppliers, that you're going to pick the suppliers for them, and everybody has their special thing, right? Well, oh, no, my stuff is different. You can't just pick that supplier. You don't understand the quality I need or the technical support I need. And so you're dead in the water already because one, they don't want your help, and two, they think they're afraid now that you're going to do things and mess up their world. And so, really, it's starting from that position of I understand how important this is. I understand that the quality of your suppliers is critical to you. And really working with you and understanding the quality of these suppliers, I really think that we can work together to improve those relationships we have with those suppliers and be more strategic in how they're supporting you and that kind of language, and um, eventually, you might get to, yeah, we need to get to an RFP and fewer suppliers, but you start with what do they need, and understanding their needs, and then maybe you can undercover in your discussions is uncover and discover when the suppliers they had actually selected had mistakes and that affected their quality or affected their technical specs, and how if they had done some fairly common to us supply chain practices, those mistakes could have been avoided. And so I often find, I can hammer them over the head and tell them, well, if you had a contract in place to begin with, but it's easier when I come around it from their side and understanding their problems and challenges. And then, like I said, drip on them and get them to understand that there's a solution to their problem and it's we can help them with that solution.
Wow, that's so powerful. Um, I don't know if the folks in the room would really be able to understand like what are the outcomes that kind of strategy would be able to generate. Sean, would you like to also talk about success stories of people adopting strategies on getting that buy-in and what the picture looks like after they get the buy-in? Like, they get the buy-in and what are the after effects for the team? Like how does it impact the team and how does it really help those teams to flourish?
Yeah, so I think the impact really is when I have always been, frankly, known for working really, really well with operations from the floor right down to the guys at the floor to the senior vice president or executive looking after those teams. And when you're working effectively with the people on the floor, the front level, mind face, whatever you want to call it, um, and that bubbles up. They will be happy with what you're doing and supporting them and making their life easier. And that information does trickle up. So then, if your team members are working really effectively and meeting the needs of that frontline customer, and then you're also working effectively with the senior executive or GM manager, whoever your peer is that you need to work with, all those things connect to then have a greater trust of the whole supply chain organization. But if, as a vice president, I spend all my time answering phone calls because I've got someone in my team who's doing the opposite of that, it undermines my ability to progress things when I'm firefighting all the time because I have team members that aren't following that approach. And so it really is critical. It's not just about individual approach, it's the team approach and the team understanding the internal customer. But I would say the best part about getting those teams aligned and trusting you is that then you get yes way more often. And if you're in an executive meeting or a pitch and you're trying to get capital, like I was trying to get capital for a gigantic, robotic solution for a warehouse. Well, me just singing how much I need these robotic solutions and putting all the ROI and talking about it and the needs of the business, well, it's a heck of a lot more successful when the VP of operations is saying, Siobhan really needs that solution. Because now I've got other people agreeing that this is money that the organization should spend. When you're the lone voice at the table saying, I need this robotic solution or whatever it is you're pitching, it's a bit harder sell, but if you know your customer, know your needs, all that, it's better. But man, it's a heck of a lot easier when your colleagues, your peers are supporting it and saying, boy, we really need that solution that Siobhan's talking about.
Yeah. No, that's again, so much more there, right? Like you have already talked and touched upon that you are already in sales and you never got in training, right? So that's so deep
Mhm.
again. And I would like to touch upon that and that reframe. is powerful because most supply chain professionals would never describe themselves as salespeople.
Right.
Like but if we accept that framing that we are selling internally every time we ask for budget, resources, or attention, right? What's the single biggest mistake most supply chain professionals, in your experience, make in how they close the deal? Is it how they open the conversation, how they handle objection, how they follow up? I'm sure we're gonna dive deep in this portion in the workshop that's coming up. But if you wanna just conclude that in a few lines, what would be the biggest mistake supply chain professionals make in that portion of it?
I think the biggest mistake is really in different things we're doing to erode trust. So even though we know what their needs are, we believe we know their needs, we believe we know their priorities, and we are doing things in the way we communicate that is eroding trust, or people on our teams are doing things that are eroding trust. But I would say at the end of the day, it's really critically important. Like I said, those first two things are so, so, so important if we don't have those aligned. But I saw in the polls that a lot of people feel like they know their customer and they know their needs. And so I think it probably is coming down to trust and how is trust being eroded and how are we not gaining trust to get that successful move forward. And it does come down to how we speak as leaders. And in the 2-day workshop, we'll talk about what does a script look like when we're speaking as a leader? What does that script look like when we're speaking to executives, and how do we speak effectively? And then what is our the language we use? What are strong ways of speaking and what are weak ways of speaking? And even in how we use our voice, whether we're speaking through our nose or speaking from our diaphragm, all of these things help us in communicating competence, and competence builds trust, right? And then there's also body language. So, how you sit, how you stand, how you are making the ask, the body language can affect that without even knowing, right? And they do say, I can't remember the data, but I think it's more than half your message is in body language, not the actual words you're saying. And so, all of these things come together in maybe hindering how we're communicating what we're asking for.
Yeah, rightly said. So non-verbal cues are so important, right, in conversations. And so now that we have already understood what are the gaps, what we are missing for the folks, what are the takeaways, Shravan, you would want them to take away? Just because we are 3 minutes away from concluding, so I would like to get us a takeaway from this webinar for the folks to really understand what can they do after they finish up this webinar. In this week later, maybe they must have a budget request or a business case sitting in their drafts right now. What is that one thing that they could do this week before their next leadership conversation to start closing these gaps? Um,
I think the most important thing is to get out and talk to their peers, their colleagues, the say the internal customer, and really just talk to them, just understand, like just have a conversation. What are you worried about? What do you focus on? When was the last time supply chain really screwed you up? Like that was a question a lot of people aren't asking. And that's one that's really important to understand. You will learn so much from them. Like, when was the last time we got in your way? When was the last time we made your life more difficult? And when you ask those questions, you will hear so much more than just that, right? It's not just an opportunity for them to complain to you. You'll actually hear what's important to them in understanding when was the last time you were in their way. And, we're always in their way, they think. But it's really good to understand why they're feeling that way and just keep probing, right? When they're telling you, well, this was a disaster. Well, why? Like, how did it impact you? What does, and just keep digging and digging, and then you'll really get a lot of benefit from that conversation.
That's again so powerful. I know we are running out of time, Shawan, but just on the last bit, would you like to talk more on how this workshop stands different than all the leadership conferences or workshops that the folks might have attended? How this specifically is different than all those soft skill trainings that maybe folks might have gotten within their companies itself?
Yeah, so in this 2 days, we will spend, the first part, as I said, really searching and understanding our internal customers, their needs, and we'll go through a series of assessments, which helps us dig deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding what's important to our customers, who those customers are, and who are the people who are most effective, or no, yeah, most effective or most affecting us? Who are those voices? Who is the leader who thinks we're just a cost center and is really maybe getting in the way, right? And so how do we work with those people and overcome those objections? And so really understanding their priorities and then how maybe they're sinking our priorities and how do we work around that and get more successful there. And then translating our performance, like we know what we do and we know the value we bring, but really learning to translate that into what they need. And so we'll spend some time, of course, on that. And throughout this 2 days, we'll do lots of breakouts and we'll learn from each other. We're not just going to listen to me talk because I certainly don't have all the answers. We're going to learn from other great leaders who will join the workshop and what's worked well for them in their organization and different industries too. This isn't just, Alberta or BC. It's like all different industries and understanding what worked well and what didn't work well. And then how to build and sustain that trust and that executive trust, and really about how we show up, how we take the stage, how we speak, how we carry ourselves, and using our already known skills of interest-based negotiations. But how do we turn that internally and so that it works to our advantage and in really closing the deal or getting our value proposition understood and bought into? And then finally, like we have to understand that capital and budget and resources are always highly constrained. So how does that affect us too? How do we get the win when it's highly constrained or, there's not a lot of money going around? And sometimes we have to rethink what we're asking for. Maybe we're not asking for the right things and we need to be more selective in what we put forward and present. But at the end of the day, we're working all the way through these 2 days and in discussing with our colleagues to develop our own personalized blueprint that we can take back to work and get started on right away. So I think it'll be different from other sessions just for the amount of interaction with each other and real kind of navel gazing, really looking at ourselves, looking at our organization, and really taking the time to think it through. So we don't have to jot notes down and then later go, I really need to think about that. We're going to have the time in the workshop to think through that.
Yeah, no, that's really, really powerful. Thanks for that. And I'm aware that we are running a little bit over time, so I'd like to close the session with that. So, Shawan, thank you so much for the session.
Thank
I
you.
think you gave a lot of people a real mirror moment today. That distinction between broadcaster and translator, again, really, really impactful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for investing your lunch hour with us. I know midday sessions asks a lot, and the fact that you showed up tells me that you're serious about not just doing great work, but making sure the right people understand the value of the work as well. Um, a few things before we sign off. The recording and the slide deck will be emailed to all the participants. And please feel free to use the link in the chat box to sign up for the workshop that's upcoming. That's going to be on the 28th and 29th of April. So please feel free to log in, check the details of the workshop. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And I'll leave you with this. The next time you walk into a room to ask for a budget, resource, or seat at the table, remember what Shawan taught us today. Thank you, everyone. You guys have a nice rest of your week ahead, and have a nice time ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.